it's Tara. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with my September wrap-up. September was an interesting month for me. I could feel myself going into a reading slump, and to avoid going into a reading slump, I basically abandoned my September TBR and read whatever I felt like. Which, you know, at least I did some reading. I didn't do horrible. 3 of the books that I read were from my TBR, and I only read 6, so half of them were on my TBR. So not horrible, but, you know, sometimes you just have to stray from your TBR. It happens. I read 6 books this month. It was a total of 2,342 pages, and my average star rating was relatively high at 4.375 stars, so I enjoyed everything that I read. Let's get into the books I read. The first book I read is House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. I bet Buddy read this with my mom, and I really enjoyed this. I am between like a 4.5 and 4.75 stars on this. It's not a 5-star, like my new favorite book of all time, but I really enjoyed it. I would sit and read like 100 pages at a time, and I really had to stop myself from continuing to read so as to not pass the pages that my mom and I had set aside for every day. So a really good book. There's a mystery element, a whodunit, what's going on, trying to solve this mystery, which I really enjoyed. And there was a paranormal element, which I also really enjoyed. It's a fairy tale retelling of, I believe the fairy tale is like the 12 Dancing Princesses is what it's called. I've never read the fairy tale that this is a retelling of, so I can't really tell you what the comparison is, but this book was great. So this follows Annalee. Annalee is the daughter of Ortune, who is the Lord of Highmore. I believe he's a lord. I don't know exactly what his title is. Annalee is one of 12 daughters, and over the past few years, 4 of her older siblings have passed away of various reasons. The book opens at the funeral of her most recent sister to pass away, and Annalee becomes convinced that this death was not an accident, and she is trying to figure out what happened to her sister. She sets out to figure out what that is. Along the way, her other sisters start going to these balls that last all night, and Annalee starts to think that there's some connection between the balls and the death of her sisters, and that something fishy is going on. So there's like that mystery element there that she's trying to make the connection, connect all the dots. Overall, I really enjoyed this book and have very few complaints. Then I read The Whisper Man by Alex North. I gave 4.5 stars. This was a really good, like, mystery thriller story. I have no idea what John is doing in the other room. I can hear him like moving around. One of the reasons why I think I really loved this book so much is it reminded me of the TV show Criminal Minds, which I love. If you're a fan of Criminal Minds, I really think you would enjoy this book. There's like a knocking sound happening, and it's really creepy that it's happening while I'm talking about this. And I don't know, I thought John was downstairs. He's not downstairs, he just walked down the hall. And now he's doing something in a sink. The Whisper Man follows Tom and Jake Kennedy. Tom and Jake have just moved to the town of Featherbanks after Tom's wife Rebecca has recently passed away. Tom and Jake are looking for a fresh start, and they move into this new town. As they're settling into their new life in this new town, a young boy goes missing, and they're trying to the town is investigating this disappearance because it bears some similarities to a string of kidnappings and murders from 20 years ago, and they're trying to see if there's any connections. Tom and Jake don't really put any stock into it until Jake, who's a young boy, he's like in first or second grade, till Jake starts acting funny and starts making some weird comments, drawing some weird pictures, and Tom starts to get a little bit suspicious. And there's the detective that arrested the criminal, the serial killer 20 years ago, gets involved in the case of this disappearance of this little boy, and pieces start to fall into place, and they start to think, did they arrest the right guy? Was this guy working with somebody else? What's going on? So I loved it. It totally reminded me of a Criminal Minds episode, which I love. So if you like a good mystery, I would recommend this. I want to talk about the next two books I read together, because I read the third and fourth book in the Hannah Swensen series. I've been rereading this series and I've been enjoying rereading it. These are the two books that I picked up when I felt myself getting into a slump. And I picked these up because they are nice, quick reads, and I don't really have to think about it. I know the character. I kind of know the way that Joanne Fluke tells her stories and how she like formats and lays out everything. So these were just really easy reads for me. I'm not going to go into too much detail of what these are about, because these are kind of from the middle of a series. You are continuing to follow Hannah Swensen. In Blueberry Muffin Murder, they are preparing for the Winter Carnival, and the Winter Carnival takes place. Somebody obviously dies. Hannah gets brought into the investigation. So some of the highlights of this book for me is Hannah and her sister Andrea. Their relationship, I think, really starts to develop in this one. The kicker for this is the murder takes place at Hannah Swensen's shop, her bake shop, her cookie shop. And so because of that, her shop gets closed because it's an active crime scene. So she gets a little bit upset at the detective, Mike, who's also one of her love interests. So that's a nice little element. This is book 3. And then you have Lemon Meringue Pie Murder, which is book 4. There's a murder, and Dolores, Hannah's mother, finds the body in this one, which is funny because in all of the previous books, Dolores gives Hannah a hard time for like stumbling across these bodies, and so Dolores gets to find the body in this one. There are some good like character development things that happen. This is why I say you probably should read the books in order, because you wouldn't know kind of what was going on with that unless you read the other ones. Both of these I give 4.5 stars, typically across the board. They're between a 4 and a 5 stars for me. So highly recommend the series, as I've said in the past couple wrap-ups, because I've been rereading them. Then I read Valour by John Gwynne. This is book 2 in the Faithful and the Fallen series. I read Malice 2 months ago. Yeah, in July. And I wanted to continue the series. I gave this 4.25 stars. It's a little bit more than a 4-star read for me. I think I enjoyed this more than Malice, because this has a little bit more action than Malice did, because Malice had a lot of like the introduction of characters, things like that. This picks up right where Malice left off. You're still in this battle between good and evil, although I feel like the who's good and who's evil is defined a little bit more in this one. I mean, there are like things that it's like, okay, this guy is definitely good and this guy is definitely bad. But then you have this one character, Nathaire, who thinks he's good and thinks he's doing the right thing. So I've had a lot of really good discussions with John about this and things that are happening in this and characters in this book. And so it's very enjoyable. It takes me a long time to read. It took me like 3 weeks to read this, but I enjoy it. It's such a good story, and there's so much happening in it, and you do fall in love with these characters. There are characters that I like just love to death, and there are characters that I despise greatly. So I really am enjoying this. The last book I read is The Defense by Steve Kavanaugh. This I had put on hold at my library, and it just became available, so I was like, well, now I gotta read it. This book I gave 4 stars. It's a like courtroom thriller. Reminded me a lot of John Grisham. It actually says like somewhere, if you're a fan of John Grisham, you'll probably like this. And I did. This follows Eddie Flynn. Eddie Flynn is a former con man who retired from that way of life to become a lawyer. And then he has a really hard court case, and it leads him to not practice law for a year. And then he gets recruited, I'll say, to represent a member of the Russian mafia or Russian mob. And so he finds himself back in the courtroom, and he realizes that in order to win this case and save lives in the process, because basically the Russian mafia is like, people are going to die if you don't do this and if you don't win this case for me. He has to rely not only on some of his old legal tricks and some of his old legal connections, but has to go back even further into his life and call on some of his former friends from back in his con artist days and some of his old con artist tricks as well. So I really, really enjoyed this. I believe there's a series that continues to follow Eddie Flynn. Eddie Flynn is a flawed character, which I enjoy reading about. I don't enjoy reading about perfect characters most of the time. There are some times that it's nice. He says some dumb things. He gets himself into some dumb situations. He can be a bit sarcastic, which I guess I tend to like in my male main characters, because I say that about a lot of my favorite books that have a male main character. I'm excited to read more of the Eddie Flynn story. So these are the 6 books that I read in the month of September. Overall, I really enjoyed this month of reading. It didn't go quite as I had planned at the beginning of the month, but you know, it is what it is. It happens. Let me know what you do to avoid going into a reading slump. Like, if you feel yourself going into a reading slump, do you just go with it and let yourself go into one, or do you have tricks that you use to avoid it, kind of like I did by abandoning my TBR? Anyways, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy reading. Bye!